Hey Geometry, so today we're going to take a look at, this is labeled as 4.5, but really it's kind of, you'll see it in 4.4 as well. That's just the way that these notes line up with the way our textbook is, but this is a property that you'll use in both of those sets of homeworks. So once you know that two triangles are congruent by, for instance, side, 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 angle, or angle, angle, side, or hypotenuse, leg, we also know, then you know that all of their corresponding parts must be congruent. So we've got this Cpctc, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. It's a mouthful. I'll refer to it as Cpctc. And basically, yeah, once you prove the triangles are congruent, you know any corresponding part is. For each of the pair of triangles, tell why they are congruent, then give the congruent statement and list all other parts that you know are congruent by Cpctc. So here we've got a side, an angle, and then we can do this vertical angle here, so we can know by angle, angle, side that they are congruent, and then, and I should use a different symbol. If I use the same exact congruent symbol, it can be confused with the other one. So we could label this a couple ways. I'll call it JKH, so triangle JKH. So going from the one arc to the two arc congruence, you know, and then finishing up, is congruent to, that triangle is congruent to LKM. All right, and so we knew that from angle, angle, side. Well, what else do we know now? We know all the other congruent parts are true too. So I know that H is congruent to M. So angle H is congruent to angle M. And so that would be the third angle. You know, get that through third angle theorem, but we just know the corresponding parts would be congruent. So I know that's congruent. We also know that some other segments are congruent. So for instance, JK is congruent to LK, and we know that, and so that we could mark those as congruent as well. I guess I'll do that here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I've got that angle. Those are congruent. And then finally this one here, HK or KH. HK is congruent to MK. So HK is congruent to MK. And so those would be the missing parts there. All right, so then this next part, we've got a side, and then we know this side's actually congruent to itself. From side, 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 we can say that triangle, and I'll start with R, and I'll go kind of 1, 2, 3 on the marks there, the congruence marks. So RNP, that is triangle RNP, is congruent to PQR. Make sure you get those corresponding parts lined up, P, Q, R. So we know that the triangles were congruent because all the sides were, but we also know that all the angles are congruent. So I'll start with the easy one. Angle N is congruent to angle Q. Just the easier one. Ooh, not triangle, angle. Angle N is congruent to angle Q. These other two, I'm going to have to use 3 letters to label. So, you know, between the 1 and the 3 here, angle NRP, angle NRP is congruent to QPR. QPR, that should have been a P. And then finally, so that was there, and then we could say NPR, angle NPR is congruent to QRP. So doom, congruent to angle QRP from that one. All right, so this over here, about impossible to read, but it says, if you have listed all congruent corresponding parts of triangles, you should have 3 pairs of congruent sides and 3 pairs of congruent angles by the time you're done. All right, so down here we're going to do a proof. So we're given that AB is parallel to CD, or DC, and then that angle D and B are congruent to each other. We're going to prove that BC is congruent to DA. Not that the triangles are congruent, but those specific parts are congruent. So first, we'll get down our givens. I'll speed this up. All right, and so now we've got our given down. We can start to put some bits together. We know that, for instance, this angle here would be congruent to that angle there. So that would be angle BAC is congruent to angle DCA. Angle DCA, and that's alternate interior angles. And then we know that AC is congruent to itself. Segment AC is congruent to segment AC. So that's the reflexive property. And then we can say the triangles are congruent. I've got angle, angle, side, angle, angle, side. So triangle, and we could say this a few different ways, but I'll call this one ABC. ABC is congruent to triangle. So ABC, I started from there, so it's going to be CDA. All right, so because C corresponds with A, you know, A from this triangle corresponds with C from that triangle, and D and B go with each other, and so on. All right, and so that is from angle, angle, side. But we're not done. We've proven the triangles are congruent. Now I need to know that these specific parts are congruent, so we can make that final statement. Segment BC is congruent to segment DA. So BC is congruent to DA, BC, DA, because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Cpctc. All right, so you might want to try this on your own at first, so you can pause and see if you can fill these in on your own. Basically, a lot of this stuff just takes practice. So go ahead and pause and do that if you want. If not, I'll go ahead and jump in here and we'll get through this. So we're going to prove certain parts are congruent based on certain information. A lot of the times it's going to involve proving the triangles are congruent and then using Cpctc to finish off. So first we have our given, so that is just copying down what we have over here. Mn is congruent to MP, and NO is congruent to PO. NO congruent to PO, and that's what we've got already marked there. We can say MO is congruent to itself. That is reflexive property. And then we could say the triangles are congruent, so triangle, and we could say this a couple of different ways, but I'll say MNO is congruent to triangle MPO. And so that is from side, side, side. And then angle N is going to be congruent to angle B because those are corresponding parts. N and P correspond. Cpctc. All right, next one. We're given that YA is congruent to BA. We got that marked. And then angle B is congruent to angle Y. That's been marked. Those are our givens. All right, and then we know YAZ and BAC are vertical angles. Definition of vertical angles. So their angles are congruent. I would usually call that definition of vertical angles, but whatever. That's vertical angles. Vertical angles are congruent. So YAZ and BAZ. So we have an angle, a side, and an angle. So we're going to use that to justify these triangles being the same. I'll call this first triangle ABC. Go down there. Nice to have that. Get that alphabet right. A corresponds to A from the next triangle. So it'll be the other, not angle, I'm doing triangles. Triangle ABC goes with triangle A and then YZ. So B goes with Y, A, Y, Z. So we've got those are congruent by angle, side, angle, angle, side, angle. And so then we can get those corresponding parts. We ultimately wanted to prove this. AZ, so segment AZ which is right up there, is congruent to CA. So AZ, or sorry, AZ should be congruent to AC. It's congruent to AC. And those are our corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. All right, last one, full on. So we're going to start out with our givens there. So we got our given down. So those two segments are congruent. We have a bisector here. So we know that angle KQA is going to this angle here is going to be congruent to angle A. Sorry, ooh, I said that wrong. KQB. That angle, KQB, is congruent to AQB. And that is from the definition of angle bisector. So we got a side and angle. Well, we can say QB is congruent to itself. QB, segment QB. I keep wanting to do an R for some reason. Segment QB is congruent to segment QB. That is the reflexive property. And then I've got side angle side, side angle, side angle side to show that the triangles are congruent. So I'm going to call this ABQ. So triangle ABQ is congruent to the KBQ. Triangle KBQ. All right, our triangles are congruent. We're not done. I want to know KB is congruent to AB. KB is congruent to AB. That is true. KB is congruent to AB. And that is because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So if we need to get to the parts, we're going to pretty much always use that proof. All right, so then on the next set of pages, you actually just have a bunch more practice. I'm not going to go through all of these with you. I'm just going to post a key to this so you can check your answers. But do those on your own and check your answers. Make sure that you're getting them.